One Heat Minute Productions presents Guide for the Film Fanatic, the podcast where we invite a guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's seminal 1986 film reference book and talk to us about that movie. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
Our guest today, folks, is a writer whose work has appeared in The New Yorker, Harper's, Jacobin, NPR, Little White Lies, CinemaScope, The Believer, and others. He is the co-host of the podcasts Michael and Us and The Important Cinema Club. He is also the author of the recent and really excellent book, Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. Say hello to the one, the only, Mr. Will Sloan. Hey, Will.
Thank you for having me, fellas. And I do want to compliment you on doing a Danny Perry podcast. I think it's a great idea for a podcast. If you ever run out of movies, maybe you can do a Michael J. Weldon podcast too. Just a thought.
Just a thought. If we tap out on the 1600 plus in here, Mr. Weldon, the Psychotronic podcast is definitely up next. But thank you for that. It is a pleasure to have you here, particularly as someone whose most recent work is clearly informed by a Perry worldview. So you know, when we have authors on, we always start with the book. I read Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA in about a day and a half. I really loved it, not only for its scholarship and its analysis, but really for its perspective on this man and his work, which is unique, I think, to your book. So let's start there. Tell us about your approach to this filmography and this filmmaker and kind of how you arrived at that POV.
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, I appreciate the kind words. I mean, if people don't know, I'm sure people know, but if they don't know, Ed Wood was, of course, famous as the worst director of all time, so-called. And I feel like when people watch Ed Wood's movies, or when I watched Ed Wood's movies for the first time, Plan 9 from Outer Space, Glenn or Glenda, Jason's got the Golden Turkey Awards book. I've met Harry Medved. I went for drinks with Harry Medved. That was pretty cool.
As have I. He's a delightful
really
fellow.
Sweet guy. Yeah.
Yep.
I think people watch the Ed Wood movies first and foremost for, there's flying saucers on strings, the cardboard tombstones fall over. But I just found that over the years, like Plan 9 from Outer Space has been with me most of my life. And after the first 15 viewings, I think you stop looking at the flying saucers on the strings.
Right.
And I think there's just something about the otherworldly dreamscape atmosphere of the films that hooks you in. And then as you learn more about Ed Wood, you learn about his life and you see the preoccupations that keep running from film to film. You realize that there's something more there. And I wanted to explore that in the book. I wanted to explore, Ed Wood, take Ed Wood seriously as an artist, assume he is an artist with an artistic personality. And what does that mean? Which is, maybe he's not a good artist, but he is an artist. And I wanted to show him that respect.
Absolutely. Well, and that comes through. And I mean, there are just passages in the book where I'm like, Will is seeing and explaining these movies and really this whole kind of subset of 50s B movies with an eye that I haven't seen applied to it before. And I think that's so valuable at this point in, sort of film critique and film history where everything has been discussed, it feels like, ad nauseum. To have a genuinely new perspective is really exciting. I would also imagine that for a character like Mr. Wood, who spent so much of his life on the fringes of the entertainment industry, that it was much more difficult to research and to verify than if you were writing about, a John Ford or Howard Hawks or someone more mainstream. What challenges did you come up against in that regard while working on it?
I mean, I do find that kind of intriguing about Ed Wood, where he was interviewed in his life a few times, mostly by people who were writing biographies of Bela Lugosi. He was interviewed about Lugosi, but he was never interviewed about himself. And so, you get a bit of a sense of what he was like from those interviews, but really you're just left with the films and the novels that he wrote, like the dozens and dozens of pornographic novels that he wrote. And from those, certain things just keep coming up over and over again. We know from the testimony of his friends and from his art that he was an enthusiastic cross-dresser in his life. And you see him, for example, over and over again, wrestling with the gender binary, let's say, in his art. And because he wasn't around, like nobody asked him these questions straight up. Nobody said, well, how do you identify, like in an interview? Nobody said, why did you make Glenn or Glenda this way? You're just left with the films. And so I think that's both an opportunity because it invites the audience to collaborate. But yeah, it's also a challenge. So the book was a bit of an exercise in getting to know Ed through his art almost exclusively.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but you're right. Nobody ever asked Ed Wood what his pronouns were. They're really, I feel like, and we've talked about this a couple of times on the show. We talked about it with Frank Conniff, actually. I feel like there's been an evolution just in my lifetime. I was, a little kid when Golden Turkey Awards came out, when it came from Hollywood came out. I feel like there has been a shift in these years in how we approach filmmakers like Wood, and not just him, from the sort of jeering, kind of Medved Brothers adjacent borderline dismissal to a book like this that is much more nuanced and much more appreciative and gives him much more of a benefit of the doubt. I have theories about why that shift has occurred, but I'm more interested in hearing yours.
Well, for Ed Wood specifically, one of the most obvious things is the issues that his work poses regarding sexuality and gender. In the Golden Turkey days, Glenn or Glenda was being revived mostly by a heterosexual audience, and they were kind of... they were kind of laughing at the vulnerability of it. Right. Whereas, I've seen it shown publicly a number of times across my life. And it's just been amazing as the years have gone on. Like, as the audience has become more and more queer and trans, as just the whatever the political context of that moment is, you can feel the energy in that room like shift a lot. I definitely feel the audience more on side with what Ed Wood was trying to do with that movie specifically, but also I see them kind of I feel the audience pushing up against its limitations. So there's that with him specifically, but also I think, more people, I think this is a half-formed point, but I feel like there's a bit of a class dimension to it as well, because Ed Wood and outsider filmmakers like him, they didn't have a lot of money to make these movies. They were working outside the system. And so it forces you to pose the question, what is like these standards of what a well-made movie are? How objective are they? What are the ideological factors and the material and the industrial factors that inform them? Probably you guys are familiar with Jay Hoberman's essay, Bad Movies, which he wrote. Which is, one of the touchstone essays of my life. He wrote it in the early 80s, kind of as a response to the Medveds. And he kind of put Ed Wood in conversation with Oscar Micheaux, who was the first great African-American filmmaker. And Oscar Micheaux, like, you look at especially his sound films, technically they're highly compromised, but... are you going to hold that against him? In a way, these filmmakers, with their limitations, they kind of create a counter aesthetic, or they pose challenges to the dominant aesthetic that I think audiences are probably becoming more interested in interrogating.
Absolutely.
I think we have this thing too now where, like, Ed Wood could have conceivably made Pink Flamingos. Or, Ed Wood could have conceivably even made some version of Eraserhead, right? But then, but Ed Wood never got a chance to then go on and make the movies that those guys got to make. I mean, he made Eraserhead, but then he also got to make Blue Velvet, which had so much more sort of money, obviously, support, real actors. I mean, so I think that we sort of got examples, like... I've never made it all the way through Hard 8 without falling asleep. I'm super happy somebody gave that guy a chance to make another movie. And so I think we've got a sense now, too, of Mean Streets is not Goodfellas. And he just never, a lot of filmmakers then didn't ever get a chance to sort of grow out of that.
Right.
That budget level, that sort of level of support. But we have a sense now of but those guys, Mean Streets is good, dude. I mean, it's, like Eraserhead is really good. I mean, it's not Blue Velvet, but it's good. And I just think that is something that is much more present now than it was when Wood was working.
You know, as you say that, I kind of wish that Ed Wood had found some investor or some producer or some mentor who could have encouraged him to lean into, could have given him those resources and encouraged him to lean into the freakier side of himself, because like he was a guy who came from the East Coast dreaming of Hollywood. And he was like, I want to make Bela Lugosi horror movies, and I want to make Poverty Row Westerns, and I want to make the movies that I grew up watching as a kid. And he got there in the 50s when those movies were being phased out. And he didn't quite know what to do. And I think if he left to his own devices and he had a lot of money, I think he probably would have just tried to make Universal horror movies. And yet there's a side of his personality that you see in these movies that is like genuinely eccentric. And I don't know, I would have loved if he could have been encouraged to explore that a little more.
Yeah, agreed.
Universal horror only with a lot of dudes in dresses.
There you go.
Sounds
good to me.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm in. 2, please. So there are a handful of Ed Wood movies in Guide, but when we reached out to you about coming on the show, you went in a different direction. So what film did you select for us to discuss today?
Yes, and the reason is because I think I've talked a lot about Ed Wood lately, which is a great pleasure. But
sure.
You know, I thought let's take a little bit of a break. But something about Danny Perry that I've always found interesting is in Guide for the Film Fanatic and in the Cult Movies books, he talks about pornography, and he has another book, I think it's called Cult Movie Stars or Cult Film Stars, where you're flipping through it, and in between, Boris Karloff and I don't know, whoever the other cult stars are in that book, there will be entries on like Seika. And it's like, oh, I'm not used to seeing this in a mainstream reference book. So coming on this podcast, I kind of wanted to pay tribute to that side of him. And the other reason I picked this is because Café Flesh just had a beautiful new restoration. It's on a 4K Blu-ray from Mondo Macabro that is well worth getting. And I just wanted to, I had only ever seen it before in, terrible looking smeary versions, and I wanted to see that restoration and see what the movie would be like looking at its best.
All right, well then let's take a look at, usually this is the part in the show where we watch a trailer together. One of the first of many modifications to the format today is that we will not be doing that, because there is not, as far as I could find, a trailer to watch.
We'll be watching a sex scene, right? We're going to hold hands and we're going to watch one of the sex scenes.
We are going to watch a brief clip from Café Flesh.
Good evening, mutants and mutettes, and welcome to Café Flesh.
So if you're coming in with any question about the cabaret influence on Café Flesh, those are put to rest pretty immediately. This is an early scene, one of our, I think the first sort of proper scene after the table setting of the open.
Like those Seika movies, they lit those movies. Café Flesh looks like an art film.
They had to light them because they were shooting on film.
I know.
And that seems like a really sort of silly thing to say now. But it's, as I'm watching this, that's what's really standing out is how sort of saturated the movie is. Like, it looks incredible. It totally makes sense in
there
a
are
list of movies.
Foregrounds and backgrounds.
It looks
Sometimes
incredible.
there are things happening in the background. Look at that. There's smoke. There are extra lights back there. There are people out of focus behind her. Look at all that smoke billowing. This is incredibly atmospheric shit right here.
I know the editing is very dynamic, and not so much in this shot, but in others, the camera will move very dynamically. I think visually, atmospherically, it stands up next to a real movie. Sorry, I hate to say that, but you know what I mean.
I do.
But
know
it does.
what you
But
mean.
it fits. This is one thing: is this book comes out, and there's a lot of '70s. It comes out in '86. There's a lot of '70s and '80s stuff in here that we've been covering. Of course, he goes before that, but it's a lot. You think cult movies, it's sort of 62 to 82, 66 to 86, sort of that is the range. And this movie sits beside all those other movies and is totally fine.
Café Flesh is a 1982 adult-only title, the first in the book that we've covered in depth on this show, so thank you, Will, for breaking that boundary. The director and co-writer, credited as Rince Dream, not his real name, obviously, that is Stephen Sayedian, and his credited co-writer, Herbert W. Day, is actually Jerry Stahl. Probably best known for his 1995 addiction memoir, Permanent Midnight, which was adapted into a film starring Ben Stiller. He also wrote extensively for television, including Alf, 30-something, and Moonlighting. This was their second X-rated movie after the previous year's Night Dreams. All right, Mike, what does Danny Perry say about Café Flesh in Guide for the Film Fanatic?
Danny says,
a XXX-rated film that has made it out of the porno grindhouses and become a legit midnight movie and cult favorite. If there is such a thing, then this is the thinking person's porno film.
I believe there is such a thing, yes.
After the bomb is dropped, the great majority of survivors have become sexually impotent. To provide entertainment, the government tracks down all sexual positives and forces them into becoming sexual performers at clubs like Café Flesh. Each night, the miserably unhappy negatives flock there to watch a sexual show, and masochists all be reminded of how things once were. Stimulated, Paul McGibney and Pia Snow go home and attempt sex, but immediately become too ill to continue, as is the case with all negatives. But she is just pretending to be a negative. We usually think of women faking sexual arousal to please their men, but the film's novel twist is that this woman pretends not to be sexually aroused so she can be his equal and not damage his ego. And not
We've all
have
been
to
there,
leave him
fellas?
to join the sex circuit. While obviously not for all tastes, this picture rates with the best in the adult field. The acting is very good, the characters are genuinely interesting, it is witty, provocative, and erotic. The sex, which is necessary to the plot, is highly stylized but graphic. The filmmakers prefer a slightly shortened version of the film in which most male orgasms are eliminated. Skillful direction by Rince Dream, who scripted with Herbert O. Day, journalist Jerry Stahl. Also with Kevin J., Marie Sharp, Darcy Nichols. So he throws out Jerry's government, but Rince Dream gets away with the pseudonym.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right. So, Will, what made you pick this particular movie out of the 1,600 plus choices in Guide for the Film Fanatic for a conversation?
Well, one of my favorite genres is the porn film made by people who hate porn films, or porn films that hate the viewer. So, I'm a big fan of Roger Watkins, who made Last House on Dead End Street and then later made such films as Midnight Heat, Her Name Was Lisa, American Babylon. Those are all films kind of in that genre. Also, Gerard Damiano, who famously made Deep Throat, but he had kind of like two kinds of movies he made. One kind was, really silly, goofy comedies, and the other was brooding, very Catholic, very sex negative movies, which I love that personality in a pornographer. And then you've got Rince Dream, or Stephen Sayadian, who intrigues me because I think he's genuinely not interested in sex at all. I think he would rather be making music videos. And unlike Damiano, who I think really is interested in sex, and so this is a question of what happens if you have a really compelling stylist, somebody with a really interesting artistic point of view, working in a genre where it's kind of like oil and water. Yeah, and I love this movie. The movie's a little hard to digest at times because his style, and this is definitely the case with his later non-pornographic film, Dr. Caligari, his style is so consciously or constantly in quotation marks. It's sometimes hard to find a way in, although I do think it is possible with this movie. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but those are some of the reasons why I find this movie compelling.
And what's your history with it? When did you see it? Were you expecting to see what it was, or were you expecting something more traditional? What's your history with it?
Well, I'm interested in the intersection of pornography and cinema. Look, I'm not going to pretend I don't have prurient reasons for having an interest in this. I am a human being, folks. But more than that, if it's possible. I'm interested in porn from this era specifically for the same reason that I'm interested in any kind of like underground or outsider cinema. I'm interested, like, you know, there's that famous book by Legs McNeil, The Other Hollywood. I'm interested that, you know,
great book.
Porn at this time really did like kind of have another Hollywood. It had its auteurs, it had its star system. This movie feels kind of on a different island from a lot of that other stuff, though. A lot of the people in this movie, I'm not familiar with from other porn movies at the time, including Richard Belzer, by the way, who appears very briefly. Sadly, not
in a sex role
from his other appearances. So, but yeah, you were asking me about my history with this movie. I rented this movie on DVD probably 15 years ago from a video store that we used to have here in Toronto called Suspect Video. Every city used to have one of these great stores, whether it was Kim's Video in New York or wherever you lived, you had a video store like this that was like the cool video store, the video store where you made your amazing discoveries. And yeah, they had their classic porn section there. And this was one of the movies that would have been kind of on the display along with, you know, certain other canonical texts like Debbie Does Dallas or The Satisfiers of Alpha Blue. And I think I was just kind of like at that time making a bit of a checklist project of certain of these movies. And, you know, I think I can honestly say, you know, hand to my heart, I've never really gotten much out of this movie on the prurient side of things.
Yeah.
I would say that's my history with this movie. But I've always found it kind of fascinating. I mean, it's a dynamic visual and oral experience. I love watching this movie. And then I'm just interested in Steven Sayadian's point of view as a guy who hates the genre and evidently hates the people who consume it, which I think kind of comes across in the central parable of this film.
Absolutely. And we'll get to that because it is a very rich text for analysis and conversation and metatextual consideration. I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think we had very similar experiences in terms of our history with this one. I watched it for the first time for this show. I had heard of it, but I for some reason had only heard of it in the sort of early 80s downtown New York art scene context. So I just assumed it was kind of like a cousin to Liquid Sky or something like that. So I didn't realize until I actually sat down to watch it for the show that it is an X-rated movie with penetration and the whole nine yards. And so it was, the whole experience was fairly revelatory for me. And Mike, that roughly mirrored your process on this one as well?
I think I've seen the version with. I didn't know there was a version without the money shots. I think I've seen a version without the money shots because I've definitely seen the guy up there giving his speech. So like maybe I just never saw the whole thing or something. I'm not sure. But I did genuinely have a moment where I was like, oh, this is poles and holes. Like this is all right. I didn't know that was happening. You know what I mean? So but I have seen the speech before. And I've definitely seen this, the setup, like the angry guy. I've seen that guy being like, I want to get laid. You know what I mean? So like, I think maybe I've just seen the version without money shots.
Yeah. Well, and it's a fascinating artifact of that particular moment. Like it feels so much like a 1982 movie, just in terms of some of the stuff that you touched on, and that, you know, it's very born out of the sort of 80s underground scene. Performance art is just sort of starting to explode, especially in New York, no wave movies, etc., which we've talked about on previous podcasts. Some of the performance art stuff is reminiscent of things that are in Isaac Butler's new book. He'll be on the show in a couple of weeks. So the sort of combination of those performance aesthetics, this underground art feel, and then these very stylized sex scenes that are sort of, how would you describe it? Sort of surrealist riffs on sort of porn cliches? Would that cover at least part of it? Because I mean, we do, like, the first sex scene is like the housewife and the milkman or the mailman, but he's a giant rat. And then we have the office scene, but where the boss's entire upper torso is a giant pencil. And there's the third party observer who's just saying, "Do you want me to type a memo?"
This is what the lady in After Hours does for a living. Right. This makes perfect sense to me.
I'm fascinated that you said that these are kind of they're enacting classic porn scenarios, because, to be honest, until you'd said that, I don't think I'd quite made that connection, because I think you're right. But these dance sequences, or these performance art sequences, whatever they are, and by the way, we only see this is a movie where the only sex scenes we see unfold on a stage, because and that's very important. But the dance sequences are so aggressively stylized that the office scenario where there's a woman behind a typewriter who's nude, and she's kind of mechanically, like a slow motion Jerry Lewis, pretending to type. And then the boss has a suit and his head is a giant pencil, and he's sort of pantomiming a woman at a desk giving him a blowjob. Well, until they're not pantomiming anymore, until they're actually doing it. But behind them are, like, it looks like the La Brea tar pits, and Sayadian keeps cutting between people in the audience sort of gazing at the stage with their mouths open, and the stuff happening on stage, and this woman behind the typewriter saying, "Can I write you a memo? Can I write you a memo? Can I write you a memo?" over and over again. I mean, one movie that this kind of reminded me of was, I don't know if you've seen Behind the Green Door, which is one of the, like, if there were 3 hardcore porn movies of the early 70s that had crossover success, it was that, Deep Throat, and The Devil and Miss Jones. The universe of Behind the Green Door is sort of similar, because most of the movie unfolds at this secret kind of eyes wide shut sex club where a woman's been abducted and she's on a stage and she's surrounded. There are all these masturbators in the club who are, like, watching her as she's being ravished, or whatever word they would have used. But in that movie, of course, like, she's really into it and the audience is really into it. And that movie's proposing a kind of, like, this is almost like a utopian vision of the movie. Whereas in this, society has decayed so much that not only can only 1% of the population have sex, only 1% of the population can do it without becoming violently ill. And those people have immediately been rounded up by the government and forced into a life of sexual servitude for the other 99%. So it's strictly become a horrible mechanical thing for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so to that end, it becomes something of a commentary. And I think this is where we get into the anti-porn, or the pornographer who hates porn or hates his audience piece of it. The idea that it is, like you say, it's all on a stage, so it comes to function as a kind of commentary on pornography and erotica itself as a genre. And posing, I think, the really provocative and pointed question that I can't think of another work of erotic art that has ever asked, which is it a relief? Is it enjoyable in some way to watch when you can't participate? Mm-hmm. Or does that just make your own loneliness and inability more agonizing? Mm-hmm. Which, is a really interesting question to ask in general, much less to ask literally within a porno movie. But, like, when you go to a strip club, do you, and you don't spend however much money it spends to actually acquire some sort of sexual release, do you come home feeling better or worse than if you hadn't gone?
And, I think it asks a similar question on the other side of the equation about these performers on a stage. Like, to what extent is turning this into a commodity? To what extent is turning this into a performance for other people? How corrosive is that ultimately?
Right. The line that really popped out at me, and again, this is, it's a Jerry Stahl script, so it's full of big ideas and great dialogue and stuff, but this was this line. If she's a positive, it's her duty to perform. Do you think we have a choice in these matters? And I was just like, wow, to pop that question into a porn movie is very provocative. I found there are a couple of terrific interviews with this director, and I'll put them in the show notes. But I found one in an interview in Interview Magazine that I found really compelling. He said, as far as the idea of form following function, if you will, for Café Flesh, it really does help to know a little bit of the backstory and why the sex is so boring and mechanical. This is his description. I always wanted the sex scenes mechanical and not sexy at all because I thought it worked with the theme of the movie. But I look at it now and I think it was a mistake. I think I could have done both, but how do you have a sexy theme with someone wearing a pencil on their head or in a rat-faced mask? And okay, I kind of see the point. But what I think becomes even more interesting as the story progresses, and we have this, this protagonist, this woman who is positive masquerading as negative. Whenever these conversations arise about, could porno chic have, for lack of a better word, penetrated mainstream movie making in the 70s. Stanley Kubrick wanted to put hardcore sex in. Terry Southern wanted to, all of these sort of apocryphal, perhaps, stories we hear about the what ifs of the intersection of mainstream movies and hardcore filmmaking. What I found tremendous and sort of overwhelming cinematically about this movie as the story continued is that it became an argument for relevant hardcore storytelling in a movie because the sex matters to the story and the characterization, even more difficult to accomplish, matters to the sex. So that her solo scene and her final sort of sequence of crossing over are, for lack of TMI, more arousing because we have an investment in the character and her predicament. And I found those scenes erotic in a way that the rest of the movie was not.
I'm glad you said it so I didn't have to, because I agree with,
okay, good.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And you can also see it in the way that Sayadian stages and blocks and edits the scenes as well, because let's say, right. I'm sure there were, thousands of lonely video renters who picked this movie up one Friday back at the video store and were like, oh, fuck, well, I guess I have to make do with what I have. It would be hard for them even because the way that those early sex scenes are shot, apart from the fact that the guy has a pencil on his head, Sayadian is constantly cutting back and forth between what's on stage and in the audience and in details that are irrelevant to the thing at hand in a way that would disrupt the rhythm of the scene. And then he finally lets that down at the end of the movie, and he lets the scene play out more or less straight.
Right. And through those early scenes too, this really jumped out at me. He's undercutting the eroticism with the sound design. The typical sort of porn soundtrack then, and even in some cases now, is the sort of bass guitar or synthesizer riffing and the moans, the moaning of the woman in ecstasy and the man talking to her or whatever. There's none, during the girl scene, there is sirens and evil laughter. Good luck getting off to that sound. There's really very little moaning anywhere in this thing. But then, once you get to that conclusion, there is a sense that there's actual sexual pleasure and release occurring. And that is using the tool to tell the story.
Which I think makes this movie more than just because he hates the genre, I think the movie can initially present as it's not just a prank and it's not nihilistic. In the universe of this movie, he's imagining a world where, a character can kind of take control of their sexuality or can hack this universe.
The quote that I found from him about the style, which I think is worth sharing. This is from an interview with Screen Anarchy. He said, "I came from hard porn, but was trying to inject an artistic film sensibility into it. But at the same time I was doing that, downtown in New York and in the LA scene, these people from the art world were putting porn into their images. People like Nick Zed, Lydia Lunch, the transgression stuff. But if you look at that stuff today, I think we won out. I think our porn to art approach holds up much better," which is an interesting point.
Yeah. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I found this movie easier to watch than some of the like Lydia Lunch or Nick Zed stuff that I've tried to watch.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, probably. And I will say this too, like the fact that it is, we hinted at this earlier, and Mike, I would like you to talk a little bit more about this. The fact that it is shot on film makes such a difference. Like, I had just in a strange bit of serendipity. Around the same time I watched this, I watched Muscle Distribution just put out a Blu-ray set of Wakefield Poole's later work. And so while I had seen Boogie Nights, I know the narrative about how the artistry all fell away when it went from shooting on film to shooting on video. And it's certainly witnessed that firsthand, so to speak. Watching those movies of his and seeing just how immediately more amateurish the shot on film stuff looks and especially sounds. After seeing his shot on film work, to see the shot on video stuff after that, really sort of drove that point home. This movie looks and sounds great. It looks and sounds as good or better than any independent film I've seen from 1982. Mike, I don't know, thoughts on it from a technical perspective?
Well, it's I think it's actually sort of two things at once. This guy's born in 1953.
Okay.
Right. So this movie comes out when he's 29 years old. So he's turning 20 in 1973. This guy got all the fucking sex he could handle.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, this guy got all the fucking drugs he could possibly take.
Sure.
So by 1980, and I think that this is one of those things, like, it's great to do all this. I love drugs and all this business. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. We don't really talk about all that kind of stuff in a personal perspective around here. But there reaches a point where it's like, there are way more Sunday mornings in life than Saturday nights. Mm-hmm. Just if you're going to survive as a human being, you have to sort of find the balance of Sunday mornings to Saturday nights.
Sure.
And I feel like, you know, would Eyes Wide Shut really not be a good movie if there was some actual sex in it? I don't think it would change the movie. Right. I think that, like, maybe if you're, 21 or whatever, and this is still like, you're still figuring out how you feel about all this stuff. I'm going to turn 50 this year, bro. Like, I know what your pussy looks like. Get out of here with that shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, at some point, it's sort of like, one thing gets hard, another thing gets wet. That's how life works. Right. And like, I think that if there was some real sex in After Hours, it would be the same movie. It would be just as good. You know what I mean? But maybe not, because actors get weird and the guy's like, oh, I don't know, I got a weird looking dick, I don't want to show it. Like, okay, so now but that's a different thing, right? Like, does John Holmes owe us his dick? Is his dick so magnificent that he sort of owes it to the public in a way that, like, Arnold Schwarzenegger sort of, like, had to become Conan? Mm-hmm. Because that was sort of, he was the only person who could. Like, I think that there's so many sort of things that work into this, that for us to get so weirded out by the sight of somebody's bush hair is just sort of ridiculous. You know what I mean? I think it's just sort of silly. And so, like, you see this guy who has, at the same time as he's done all the sex and drugs that he can possibly handle, he also learned how to use a camera. Right. He also learned how to block a shot. He also met a bunch of dudes who know how to work lights, and a bunch of people who know how to who function with makeup. And if you were alive and you turned 20 years old in 1973, I'm sure it just sort of felt like the world was going to be like that.
Right.
You know what I mean? You think about 1982, dude, you're 29 years old. You can't fucking imagine
Right.
what the world's going to be like in 2002 when, like, all of a sudden sex has become completely infantilized. And you know what I mean? And, like, It's disgusting, bro. Like, Seika was a woman. The boobs on this lady, you know what I mean? Like, even if you put her in some sort of a stupid plaid skirt, it was clear this was a woman.
Right.
By the time this guy is reaching our age, like, sex has just become completely plastic and infantilized. It's Britney Spears now, who actually looks like a child because she actually is. It's not Seika. It's not Linda Lovelace, who had, like, lived some years.
Sure.
Like, you know what I mean? Still had, like, fairly fresh skin, but had lived some years by the time we found out who she was. Like, the sexuality of, like, experience was actually something that was sexualized. Of, like, you know, even in something like Porky's or sort of, you know, the sort of sex comedies, they would go and they were hoping to find a woman who could teach them.
Right.
You know, there was a sexual element to that, right? It wasn't sort of hit me baby one more time. I mean, I just think that I just can't imagine. This guy's still alive. You know what I mean? Like, I just can't imagine how different the world feels now than it would have felt to him then. And the idea that you would light your movie and that you would make an art movie and that you would take it seriously and that you would get a real writer to do your dialogue and that it would also have fucking in it, I'm sure just felt so much more of a piece and reasonable and an expression of his life at that point. The life that he had lived as an artist in his 20s through the late 70s and early 80s. I'm sure, like, all of it just made so much more sense, and it just didn't seem weird.
Right.
In a way that, like, now it just seems like I can't fucking believe that anybody ever actually lit a porno. Like, a lot of people lit porno because it was a part of their lives and it didn't seem so crazy.
Well, you know,
I wish we could get back to that.
Well, you know, back then too, a lot of the reason why porn films were real movies is because, you know, the recent obscenity rulings had made it such that a movie had to have socially redeeming value and had to meet contemporary community standards. So when Deep Throat was being prosecuted all over the country, at these various trials, they could say things like, well, it has humor, it has a story. It teaches a very valuable message, which is that there's more than one kind of way to get sexual pleasure. You know, these sorts of things.
Right.
That's
now,
psychotic.
you know,
that's the Hays Code argument for porn. That's amazing.
Yes. It's
amazing.
Crazy but true. And now I don't even know to what extent porn can be called movies anymore. I think it's just a bunch of individual OnlyFans accounts, basically.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, the idea too that you know, like, part of the reason I hadn't seen it was you know, like, I feel like Mike and I, well, I'm not sure how much younger than us you are. I'm assuming you're younger than us.
I will reveal that I am a podcast exclusive. I'm 37 years old.
Okay. So this, we may even be dating ourselves from you here. Like, I feel like, Mike, we were of the last sort of generation that did see porn in the context of a full film. Like,
Jenna Jameson was the last real porn star.
Yeah,
right. I mean, I don't know if that's real, but I think that's probably correct.
We would rent or buy a videotape or a DVD that had an entire feature motion picture on it.
I hear that's what people did.
Where you would fast forward through the parts where people talked, but it was at least like within that context, and that just feels completely alien to just the sort of the Pornhubification, the clipification, the way that the art, if you will, morphed into something where it's only taken in these kind of bite-sized pieces. So now, I mean, it's not that insane that this existed, but to I think people our age or Will's age maybe, but like beyond that, this is completely off the grid in terms of how people think of porn now.
This was something that Karina talked about. What movie did Karina do when she came on? I don't remember what movie she did.
Well, but she talked about she was on Very Good Year. And
we were talking about erotic 90s, right?
But she was promoting the erotic 90s series, right?
And she talked about the narrativization of sex.
Right.
It's like, it's not necessarily a matter of like, oh, I miss seeing tits on screen, right? It's the narrativation of that human experience.
Right.
And that was some, of course, Karina's going to express something in a way that I would never have gotten to on my own. But like that was that sort of moment where she described it that way. I think that's the thing. And that is like, even from those Jenna Jameson movies, that doesn't really exist.
Right.
You know, what plot there is even thinner.
Right.
Michael, earlier you were suggesting, like, would Eyes Wide Shut or After Hours be a different movie if it had, actual penetration in it or something like that? And I was mulling that over because I think one reason, like, even despite all this time, all these decades, and the complete like pornification of society, there is still like a stigma. There's still a taboo on that image. And I think something that Café Flesh gets at, whether intentionally or not, is that there's something uncomfortably real about it. There's something uncomfortably authentic about it. When two actors acting a role express emotions, there's a kind of a buffer there in the fact that they're acting. But when they're actually engaged in intercourse, I think in the audience's mind still there's like a crossing of the line, a crossing of some sacred line of privacy. And in this movie, Café Flesh, where like that exists only for a small number of people, like I think that's part of the appeal for the characters in the movie, is that they're being exposed to this thing that is so real. And then, as the film goes on, like it's real, but then it's mechanical for most of the movie. And then the movie reaches this kind of crescendo at the end where it's both, where it feels within the context of the movie truly real. But yeah, I think if Eyes Wide Shut had hardcore scenes, I think it would probably alienate a lot of people just because there's still a built-in kind of anxiety around being exposed to something that raw.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and I think it's very, like, it's project dependent. Like, you don't necessarily need to see it in Brokeback, not because it's not two dudes, but because it's so intimate. It's two dudes just like out on the middle of this hill somewhere, as opposed to like, I'm not necessarily saying we need to see Tom and Nicole, and the Uglies, right? But like in the context of the party, does it change things?
Where much like this, it's a performative sort of act, and we are viewing it alongside an observing character. That's really interesting.
But I think you're right that just the very fact of it not having been there, when you do see it, you would assume it's used for purpose. You wouldn't assume that it would just be sort of in the thing because it's in the thing.
Yeah.
If you've ever been to that kind of party, you're going to get that kind of shot. You know what I mean? So like,
I think we can all agree that the important thing to do in Eyes Wide Shut is to superimpose like computer generated images of like masked figures in front of what's happening. I think that's the correct approach. Yeah.
That's the way to go. Yeah. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we will talk
There's
about
so much
the
to
movies.
talk about in this porno film, man. This is great. Thank you.
We'll talk about the movie's release and reception. Be right back. All right, friends, let's talk about the release and reception of Café Flesh, which opened... Well, here's the tricky thing about covering an X-rated movie on this show. Many of our typical conversation points are a little more murky in the world of adult film. So, for instance, IMDb, which is our usual first source for release dates, lists this one's as 1982. No more specific than that. As a backup, we look to Wikipedia, and they list it as 1982, and that's it. So no help there either. Now, Letterboxd gives a date of November 20th, 1982. And while I can't find that anywhere else, one source is better than none, so we're going to go with that. We are also, unfortunately, out of the wonderful era where ads for porn sat side by side with mainstream movies on the pages of the New York Times. But assuming Letterboxd is correct, other big movies running in Gotham that weekend included E.T., First Blood, Time Bandits, Creepshow, The Missionary, Slumber Party Massacre, The Last Unicorn, My Favorite Year, An Officer and a Gentleman, Eating Raoul, Fun City favorite Smithereens, re-releases of The Empire Strikes Back and Fantasia, and at several theaters across the tri-state area, midnight showings of Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip, which had received a conventional release the previous March. I got a chance to see Richard Pryor live in concert at a midnight screening at Lincoln Center a few years ago, and that is a great way to see a Richard Pryor concert movie. Anyway, Mike, what were the news headlines on that day?
You know, it's a pretty good movie. Have you ever seen Slumber Party Massacre?
It's great.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's
It's
great.
pretty good. I did not know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I enjoyed that.
Slumber Party Massacre 2 also has things to recommend in it.
There we go.
All right. Right on. Saturday, November 20, 1982, and Israel was upset with U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz because Shultz publicly criticized a new rule for international teachers going to the West Bank.
Okay.
Israel was asking them to sign a declaration denouncing the Palestine Liberation Organization, and Shultz thought this was limiting their freedom of thought. Remember when even Republicans cared about freedom of thought, even for people we disagreed with? Do you remember when that was like, well, I don't necessarily know that those kids ought to be doing all of that, but, you know, they have the right to do so. You remember that?
One thing that's changed is that
bro.
Israel and Palestine have completely disappeared from the headlines. You never hear
There we go.
anything
Yeah.
about that issue
There we go.
anymore. Yeah.
Great.
It
Love
is wild. Thank you, Mike, for bringing me maybe the one thing I ever agreed with George Shultz about.
This is what I'm saying. These people were gross. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a really brief mention that I might have to do a whole documentary about this just to learn more about it.
Oh, great.
It's in the New York Times. Music scores by George Gershwin, Cole Porter, Richard Rodgers, Vincent Yeomans, and others were discovered in a Warner Brothers warehouse in Secaucus, New Jersey. The find was called, quote, one of the monumental discoveries in the history of American musical theater, unquote, by the president of the Institute of the American Musical. There's so many things going on in this paragraph that I don't know anything about. I don't know anything about scores in warehouses in Secaucus. I don't know that there is an Institute of the American Musical, let alone who the president is.
Yeah.
This paragraph offers more questions than answers. But I felt like it was appropriate to a movie podcast, and I do want to know more.
Love that.
Finally, also in the New York Times front page, there's a whole article about President Reagan making the tough decision to cut $30 to $50 billion in social spending, while adding $1,600 billion to the defense budget.
That was hard for
Jason-
him, was it? That was a tough decision for Reagan. Yeah.
Tough decisions.
Tough decisions.
Damn.
Yeah.
Jason, how much is $1,600 billion? Is there another way to say that? Is that weird?
It is weird. Yes.
I read it like 5 times, and I was like, no, I do know what that means. They just weren't used to using the T word back then.
No.
But, I mean, guess where it's going to happen first?
Yeah.
Defense spending, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know how much $1,600 billion is, but it might be enough to keep mental hospitals, VA hospitals, air traffic control. I don't know. Anyway,
Nope.
this 1982.
None of that. No, we got to put that aside for a slush fund to pay off January 6 rioters.
I hope that the teenagers are making a new kind of punk rock that I just haven't found out about yet.
There we go.
Jason, what did the critics say about Café Flesh?
Well, again, it's hard to say. 5-10 years earlier, major publications likely would have reviewed a movie like this, X-rated or not, but by late 1982, nearly 2 years into the Reagan administration and the moral majority and so forth, no such luck. However, a few brave souls have reviewed it more recently. In the Chicago Reader, Fred Camper wrote, quote, Stephen Sayadian's 1982 film is more interesting for its high style. The cafe acts are done up as Hollywood production numbers. A man dances wearing a giant phallic pencil mask while 2 women in an oil company office move with mechanical repetitiveness that's mirrored in the copulations that follow that make explicit the sexual subtext of mass entertainment.
He's abusing that M dash. He needed to split that up and write that better.
Fair enough.
I'm happy to say I can provide a little bit of insight into how the film was received because there's a great website called the Rialto Report that, it has.
Oh, the Rialto Report rules.
They have a great podcast, of course, where they interview veterans of this genre, but they've also digitized a number of magazines from the time.
Oh,
various industry magazines. So just looking at Atom Film World, which was, one of the industry magazines, in one of the issues, I'll say what issue it was in a second. I just have it open now, but they have a big article, a big spread called Café Flesh X Film of the Year. And it's written by one Jim Dawson, and it begins, people in the adult film industry are always talking about improving the product and taking great pride, some of it justified, in the fact that X-rated movies now have better acting, more literate scripts, and higher production values than they did several years ago. Yet a new movie called Café Flesh, easily the most innovative, thought-provoking, and professionally made X-rated film in years, is being vilified by adult industry insiders, particularly film producers and reviewers. It's too fucking weird for me, said one prominent producer, shaking his head after a screening of the film. Another one commented, nobody will watch that garbage. Hell, who can understand it? Arthur Knight of The Hollywood Reporter panned the film and labeled it anti-erotic. Even Velvet's visionary Bill Margold, while applauding Café Flesh's imagination, wrote, enduring Café Flesh is like watching a pair of perfect tits being stuffed into a barbed wire bra. One more.
Always had a way with words.
Yeah. One more quote here. Hustler's Dave Spector summed it up as, adult audiences will need an open mind to get hooked on Café Flesh. Now, mind you, this is an article in Atom Film World that praises it as the film of the year. It also was nominated for Best Picture and a lot of other awards at the Adult Film Awards. It lost to Roommates, which was by Chuck Vincent, another very downbeat, very kind of anti-erotic porn film, but a more melodramatic, a more kind of soapy, plot-driven one. So kind of a Citizen Kane, How Green Was My Valley sort of situation.
There we go.
Film Awards that year. So
there we go.
As you can see, it was received with sort of cool admiration by a lot of the industry, but a divisive film.
There we go. Thank you for that, sir. Man, Will brought the homework. I did want to share this one other roughly contemporaneous review, just because it pinpoints an element of the film that somehow we haven't touched on. Time Out London proclaimed, though hardly on par with the 1898 novel, which foreshadowed in most significant details the wreck of the Titanic 14 years later, this slice of sci-fi porn does show a certain eerie prescience. Produced on the very eve of the AIDS pandemic, it proposes a future in which, following some plague-like visitation, the world's population is either sex positive or sex negative. In this tale, though, positive is good, means you can do it, whereas the unhappy negatives can only congregate at Café Flesh, just sit and watch. This is merely the framework for the standard hardcore action that follows, but a thought-provoking framework all the same. I'm not sure I'd call what follows standard hardcore action, but your mileage may vary, I suppose.
Well, there are only so many things you can do, right? There are only so many places you can put it.
That's very true. There's our pull for social. Will Sloan saying there's only so many places you can put it. How did it do in terms of box office and awards, Mike?
Not to sound like a broken record here, but on an 80s XXX rated movie, it's hard to check. We do have a quote from the director, Steven Sayadian, in Interview magazine referencing both this and the film he made with the same team the previous year. Neither Night Dreams nor Café Flesh were ever that successful as porn films, but they broke house records as midnight movies. We would replace Eraserhead and Pink Flamingos. I swear to God, I didn't read this at the time. We would replace Eraserhead and Pink Flamingos and tour the country. I thought, my God, we've really got a genre here. We own this.
Right.
The surprising thing is that it also didn't sweep the Adult Film Awards, although maybe considering the anti-eroticism of it all, that's not so surprising. At the Adult Video News Awards, it was nominated for Best Cinematography and Best Supporting Actor for Andy Nichols, who plays MC Max Melodramatic. I gotta say, you got a character whose name is literally melodramatic.
Right.
I'm at least halfway there with you already.
Yeah.
I mean,
totally. No, he's
right
great.
From the beginning.
It's a terrific performance.
And it won Best Art Direction. It won the same award from the Adult Film Association, which also nominated the movie for Best Costume Design and Best Film Editing.
And then at the Oscars, it narrowly lost to Gandhi, which I think, is ridiculous. But I mean,
barely. It was the people's favorite.
It's all politics,
It is. It is. It's who campaigns best, and they didn't get their screener tapes out in time. Okay, now it's time for a segment we call Double It Up, where we each select one movie that we think would make an ideal double feature with today's focal film. Will Sloan, you're our guest, which means you go first.
Well, I am going to go in the porn category with a movie that was mentioned earlier by me, I think. Gerard Damiano's The Devil and Miss Jones, which I think would make an interesting double feature with this movie because it is also a very downbeat movie that doesn't seem to hate porn as such, but it seems wary of the idea of extramarital sex, while also being a movie that genuinely wants to arouse you. It is working hard at that. So I think it would be interesting to have a double feature of two different kinds of ambivalent pornographers, working in two different registers and at different temperatures.
Will, I swear I settled on this one before our conversation, so I'm not ripping off your earlier comment, but I actually saw Behind the Green Door for the first time also fairly recently. It just got a really nice 4K and was really taken with it and thought it, and I'm not going to just like vomit back what you said earlier. It occurs to me to be a good double feature for the same reasons. It is high artistry, it's shot on film, it looks great, so forth, but that sort of performative setting, the onlookers, the performers, the way that's commenting on what we in the audience are doing when we're watching this film. I find all of that really fascinating. And also, like, there's some genuinely sort of cool cutting edge for 72, 73, whenever it came out, things happening in terms of cinematography, in terms of film processing, color saturation. Like the Mitchell brothers made this movie and there was artistry to what they were trying to do. So that's my pick, is Behind the Green Door. Mike, what about you?
This was mentioned also earlier, but you can only pair this guy's movies with this guy's movies. So I watched Dr. Caligari after watching Café Flesh, and it's fucking great, man. It is super, super weird, super crazy, and actually, I don't know that it would be improved by Pop Shots. I think actually, like, it's watching this, especially right on the back of watching Café Flesh. Like the sex in Café Flesh is so sort of stylized. He had to make it a show, and so everything sort of moves around the show. The story has to sort of stop to come back to the show. You know, the story has to sort of has to react to the show in some way. And in Caligari, he's completely freed of that. Right. You know, and can just sort of like be a fucking utter lunatic and tell his utter lunatic story. And like, I'm not even going to pretend that I don't need to watch this movie 7 more times to get it. But one thing that like occurred to me as I was watching it is like, even the people who are thinking or about or sort of in any time sex comes up in this movie, it's not for sexual reasons. You know, people are using it for something else, or they're in some sort of other sort of like headspace with it. And so actually, like, that's a real knowing all of this about his, because I didn't know all of that about his approach to making Café Flesh, actually makes a lot of sense in the way sort of Caligari is told. And actually, if you put fucking in the middle of this movie, it not only would it like stop the sort of plot and the weirdness, but it would actually run counter to these characters who are all much too inside their own heads to engage with their bodies. Sure. So I would just say, like, Caligari, I think, is a fascinating follow-up to Café Flesh. And you kind of have to let him live in his own world. And, like, it's like watching Derek Jarman movies in a way, dude. This shit reminds me more of Jarman movies almost than anything else.
There we go.
And, like, he has his own universe, and you just got to go to it with him.
Yep. All right. Will, the book again is Ed Wood, Made in Hollywood, USA. It's excellent. It's on shelves now. Where can people read you and hear you and follow you on social media?
Yeah, I have 2 podcasts, The Important Cinema Club, which is a film history podcast, and Michael and Us, which is kind of culture and politics podcast. And I'm on the socials. It's easy to find me. Just search my name.
I am Jason-Bailey on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Michael Hull on Letterboxd, where I will write about porno. I ain't scared.
Good for you. Thank you for your service. If you like the show and think other people might like it too, please do leave us a rating and or review on your podcatcher of choice. Join the mailing list. We'll send you the weekly show notes. We'll send you links to stuff. That's at buttondown.email/filmphonetic. If you'd like to make a donation, support us and the show, you can do that at ko-fi.com/funcitysounds. And of course, if you like to see people talking into microphones and randomly holding up books that are sort of related to things that we're talking about, you can find us on YouTube. Our channel is Guide for the Film Fanatic.
Our humblest thanks to our guiding light, Mr. Danny Perry, author of Guide for the Film Fanatic. And shout out to executive producer Blake Howard, the star of the show. But under his boxers, nothing will grow. They're positives and negatives, but he's in between because he's lost his weapon in World War III.
Thank you again, Will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening. On the next Guide for the Film Fanatic, Isaac Butler, award-winning author of The Perfect Moment, joins us to discuss the delightful decadence of Bob Fosse's Cabaret. See you then.